association with Malta, having bought a house in Sendia facing Castel Sant'Angelo in the 1950s, and she considered it as her second home and spent time there every year, often on her return from Sicily. In the late 1960s, she undertook a survey and part excavation of what's called a rocks awash site, which proved to be a Roman ship. She promptly and informatively published this in the monograph, The Malta Wreck in Xlendi Bay. And so it's appropriate for us to have here, as our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Timmy Gambin, who spent much of his life working in Malta. He is Associate Professor of Classics and Archaeology at the University of Malta. He's been involved in a number of collaborative research projects, including the PaleoMed project with the CNRS in Aix-en-Provence, which is aimed at the reconstruction of the ancient coastal landscapes and environments of the Maltese Islands. This evening, he is going to tell us about the unique Phoenician shipwreck, which he's studying together with Jean-Christophe Sauveslou of the University of Aix-en-Provence, and in collaboration with a number of international partners. First discovered in a remote sensing survey in 2007, this is the deepest ship currently being excavated. It is a well-preserved wreck, datable approximately to the 7th century BC, lying at an almost unbelievable depth of 110 metres off the coast of Xlendi Bay, Gozo. This ship may be one of the best preserved underwater archaeological sites of Malta, because it's been established that the bulk of the cargo is intact, buried in sediments for 2,700 years. It's hoped and believed that this may offer new and significant information about Phoenician seafaring and trade in the central Mediterranean during the Archaic period. So, not only does this wreck enlighten us as to the economic history of the central Mediterranean during the Archaic period, it also provides extraordinary challenges regarding methodologies and access as well as communication. Its exploration is nothing short of thrilling. And now please welcome Timmy Gambin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to the trustees and to Lucy Blue for the invitation. The talk this evening is divided into 3 sections. I'm going to start off by describing how the shipwreck was found. Then I'll move on to the past few years, how we've developed methodologies to study the shipwreck, and then the final section will be dedicated to how we communicate the shipwreck, and the various challenges and opportunities will come out throughout the talk. So there's Malta, right in the center of the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily, and our shipwreck is located off the northwestern point of Gozo, off a headland called Ras El Wardia. On this side of the island, the water gets very deep very quickly. There are sheer cliffs that rise out of the water, cliffs that rise to about 120 meters from sea level, and then the sea drops to 80, 90, and 100 within a couple of hundreds of meters. This site is significant, even if there wasn't a shipwreck, for a couple of reasons. So first, the arrow on the left is pointing at Ras El Wardia, this headland sticking out to sea, and at least from the 4th century BC, the Carthaginians had constructed a sanctuary, and if one considers that the center of habitation is about 6 kilometers away, the only way to understand this sanctuary is actually to look out to sea. And in fact, the next landfall from that point is Pantelleria, so this small island between Cape Bon and Sicily. The arrow to the right, you can denote the entrance to Xlendi Harbour from the white cliffs. Okay, and again, anybody sailing from Cape Bon and Pantelleria coming across the Maltese Islands would find Xlendi Harbour as its first port of call. Where there's fresh water, it's only a 15-minute walk up to the ancient centre of habitation. This is a photo taken on the commute to the office, so we're leaving Xlendi Bay and going towards Russellwardia, so the headland that you can see on the far right. But don't be fooled, this is a typical summer's day, and within a few hours the sea can turn relatively nasty. Remember, or rather keep in mind, we're 120 meters above sea level, so and no photo can do justice to the size of the waves. But it's not just the size of the waves, it's the confused sea that's created by the curvature of these steep cliffs, and the fact that the depth goes up from very deep to shallow, creating a very, very confused sea state. Today, nowadays, everything should come with a disclaimer, and everything you hear today is the fault of one person who happens to be here. His name is John Wood. He was a very good friend of Honor Frost, and all this is his fault because in 1958 he set up a project, and it was actually the very first archaeological project in Malta, and together with a number of friends of his from the Royal Navy, they explored what was a relatively deep water site, I think down to something like 60 meters, just outside Xlendi Bay. And these are some photographs from a local diver who participated in that project. So it was in the context of wanting to delineate this shipwreck that had been worked upon in the late 50s and 60s that we surveyed the approaches to Xlendi Bay. So John's team worked in this area here, and we wanted to find out whether the site extended into deeper waters. So we surveyed what turned out to be a 3rd century BC shipwreck, which is spread in this area, but something caught our eye right here. And this is way back in 2007, so we've been working on this site off and on for 12 years. This is the first image, the first sonar image, so everything is desolate on the seabed, and except rather for this anomaly, which could or could not have been an ancient shipwreck. A year later, we went back with a more powerful and higher resolution side scan, and now things start to take shape. We know that it measures 12 by 5 meters, so that's quite a good ratio for an ancient shipwreck. You can also see objects in line with holes, so possibly mouths of amphoras, and then these clearly worked blocks on either extremity, and the other telltale sign were the rounded shadows of some of the loose objects, which you can see over here. But the sonar image won't tell you if it's a Greek shipwreck, Roman, if it's Roman, what period, etc. So we needed to establish, essentially eyeball what we had found. So I think in 2009 we deployed a small remote operated vehicle which had a digital camera, and this is one of the very first photographs that we took of the site. So very different to a typical Roman shipwreck, which then, generally is a big mound of amphoras, and mainly one type. Sometimes you may have two types on 1st century BC or a 1st century AD shipwreck. So quite clearly, we had an ancient shipwreck with this mixed cargo, and back in 2009, working off a small boat, we also created this photo mosaic. This was very important to us. When you're working with an ROV in deep waters with next to zero visibility, it's like you're looking at a master's painting very close up. You can appreciate the brush strokes and the technique of the artist, but in order to understand the painting, you need to take a few steps back, and this is what this photo mosaic allowed us to do. And at the time, we were extremely proud of this result, and it did help us create a very valid argument in favor of taking the study forward. So this ancient shipwreck, the cargo of this ancient shipwreck rather, is divided into 3 distinct sections. On either side of the site, you have these worked blocks, and the central section is dedicated to ceramic objects, a mixture of typologies of ceramic objects. So some very clear, defined spaces with regard to the cargo. We also wanted to know whether we were looking at the bottom of a cargo, and then the ship may have been carrying something that was organic, textiles, for example, or grain, and then this would have disintegrated over time. And we were led to think that mainly because of these big blocks that were present on the site. The other thing was that it could be the topmost layer of a cargo, and then the rest of the goods were buried in the sediment. So we ran a sub-bottom profiler over. This is an instrument that sends pulses through the sediment. The interpretation of sub-bottom data is a mixture of wizardry and science. And you have to take the word of the expert that there's about 1.8 meters of cargo buried in the sediments. And for the Thomases, like myself, who think it's more wizardry than science, a closer look at some of the photographs gives a clear indication that there is at least a second layer, that's popping its head out from under the sediments. So, if we consider 3 seasons as phase 1, we had a well-preserved ancient shipwreck. It was rare and important, and this comes into play. This influences why and how we take this project forward. But we needed some better assets to continue. We had exhausted. We did what we could do with the assets that we had available in those early years. So, on the basis of the data that we gathered in those first 3 seasons, I got together with my colleague Jean-Christophe Sorisseau, who's co-director on the archaeological side of the project, and we started sort of exploring the cargo, what typologies we had, where they were from, the age of the shipwreck, until finally in 2013 we had the courage to present our findings at a very small workshop in front of some very eminent maritime archaeologists from France who can be quite tough, and also ancient historians who specialize in the archaic period. And we managed to convince them with regard to our findings. So we applied to the French National Science Foundation in 2013, and in 2014 we were able to bring COMEX down to Malta with this vessel that had a manned submersible and a remote operated vehicle. We needed a very high resolution image of the entire site so that we could study it in more detail and start to distinguish the typologies with more ease. And one of the instruments that we had on board was this trifocal camera. So you can see 3 cameras that are all controlled by a computer engineer who's inside the submarine, and most importantly, these fantastic lights. And we've learned, you know, it's ideally you have a fantastic camera and fantastic lights, but if not, it's better to have a mediocre camera and great lights rather than the other way around. And in 2014, I was also given the opportunity, or rather, I imposed the opportunity for me to descend on the site for the first time. And this is the image that we created. So the first image I showed you, the first photo mosaic, consists of about 270 photographs, and coincidentally, this image consists of 2,700 images. And you can actually see the path of the submarine going westwards and where it turns in order to capture one of the outlying ceramic pieces. I want you to keep your eyes on this part here amongst those blocks, and you can zoom in, and this is the resolution that we achieved in 2014. You can actually count the seashells and even the cardinal fish that are present on the site. And this is all online. Any of you can go on the project website and zoom in and manipulate to your heart's content. We also recovered a number of objects, 3 ceramic types, all the outliers, so objects that were quite clearly in a secondary position, and we also recovered one of the stones. We developed a special lifting device, and then divers went down to 30 meters and placed the objects into bags to ease the pressure. I'd like to say that they were designed specifically for this project and they're high-tech, but they're coolie bags from Lidl. But they were absolutely fantastic for the job. So once the objects were recovered, obviously besides the desalination and other forms of recording, we scanned them with a laser scanner. One of the ultimate dreams of this project, or rather of mine, to come up through this project, is to have a digital warehouse. So anybody in the future who wishes to study the site can actually sort of go into a virtual warehouse and study each amphora. So this is the first thing one has to do with this in mind, is to scan every single object. But the other thing it enabled us to do was we started to project the objects onto the 3D model. So you can see, we know what typology is sort of half sticking out of the sediment, and then you project the object, and this allowed us to visualize what to expect if we ever had to excavate. Okay, and we did this for the entire site. We collaborate with a number of very, very clever people from the CNRS in Marseille who do a lot of the computer work that we'll be seeing. So phase 2, fancy workboats and subs are super cool. But we also learned that there was a lot more to be done. But the expense of workboats is not for a normal archaeological project. So it was a bit of a double-edged sword. It was fantastic because we honestly were super happy with the results. But at the same time, we knew that we just couldn't afford to get a vessel like the Comex vessel back, you know, sort of year in, year out. So we had to think how to approach this. So we needed to develop a low-cost project at depth. What happened to us in 2014 is that the weather turned and the vessel couldn't continue working. They still charge you a standby rate, though, I must say that. And so we left the site without it being recorded as we had left it in 2014. So we removed 4 objects and we hadn't recorded it. So that was something sort of in the back of my mind. At least I wanted to do that so that if we never return to the site, at least we have a record of how we left it. There were a number of other objects. Now we started to recognize a bigger variety of objects now that we had higher resolution imagery. And then, quite clearly, we had to develop a method without a manned submersible that would permit us to record the site every time we disturbed it. And after 2014, we dedicated all of 2015 to experimentation. So diving deep on sites, which measure 12 by 5 meters, recording, seeing what the dive profiles were, seeing, who could be in the team, who could not be in the team, etc. So in 2016, we organized a very small expedition. This was funded partly by the university and a number of individuals, some of whom are here, and I thank them. I can't mention them all, but it was very hard to convince people that this could be done. And the more people said it couldn't be done, the more I wanted to do it, because I don't mind being proved wrong, but it would have killed me if we never tried. So this is the photograph actually from the very, very first dive that we did on the site, and from day one we were starting to mark amphoras that we wanted to recover. And here you can see part of the team going around and marking the amphoras. The first dive was very difficult because it's 2016, so we had been working on it for 9 years, and sort of the first few minutes that I was on the site, I had to kind of pinch myself and then say, okay, there's actually work to do. This is the dive profile of a typical dive on the site. So you have the depth and time. It takes about 6 minutes to descend. We meet at 6 meters, which is for a bubble check, so a safety check. It takes us about 6 to 7 minutes. It depends if you're carrying something heavy, probably go down quicker. We have about 12 minutes on the site, and then it takes us close to 2 hours decompressing to return to the surface. And the bulk of the time, as you can see, is spent at the 9 to 6 meter level, and we spend our time on a decompression trapeze where our backup divers come and bring us, I'd like to say chocolate and tea, but actually they come and take the cameras and all the extra cylinders that we use. And this is a fly-through of the site as recorded at the end of 2016. So not only could we record the site well, but it was done successfully on 2 occasions. So just at the very beginning, because we wanted to record as we had left it in 2014, and then at the very end. Again, always keeping in mind that we may never return, and therefore we have a record of the site as it was left. This wasn't enough. We wanted to compare it to the COMEX site, because if we were going to continue working, we wanted to be absolutely certain that we were getting it right. So we sent our model to Pierre Dra, who's this IT guru in Marseille, and when he compared the 2 models, there was a maximum error of 3 to 4 millimeters. So that was crucial for us. So post 2016, we could work. We were happy with the standards that we achieved, this millimetric error, and we needed more funding. And here I can thank the Honor Frost Foundation, because they really stepped up to the mark and believed in this project and enabled us to do what you're going to see in the coming slides. And importantly, now with the funding obtained, that we were in this for the long term. Prior to, believe it or not, prior to 2017, we would shot the wreck every single time and have to swim down. It would take us 3 minutes to go from the shot line to the shipwreck if it was far away. We'd have these flashy strobes, okay, so that we could see where we had to return to. And 3 minutes out of 12 is 25% of your time. So we obviously had to think of a solution. So a local company donated. We asked for a small mooring block. This turned up. We dropped it away from the site and then moved it towards the site. And that's there permanently. This is us, a group of fat middle-aged men mainly who, it's the demographic of the diving world. So this is the bays we used for 2 years. So on the right you have the bailout cylinders. Those are just in case of an emergency. And on the left is our primary breathing apparatus, which is a rebreather. And this is a typical scene. Every day we take all the stuff down to the pier in Xlendi Bay. The boat comes, picks us up. Funnily, the boat berths in Melliha, which is where Honor worked in '67. We load everything, go out to the site, and then come back. And on the edge of the pier is Imi Wallen, who's the first, and so far only woman to have dived the site. More fat middle-aged men, but this is the boat we work on. This is the boat we've worked on for the past 3 years. It looks chaotic. It actually is kind of organized chaos. We organize the cylinders from the quay according to team. So first team goes in first. So these would be the bailout cylinders for the first team, second team, and then third team and fourth team, if there are any, go under the benches. In 2017 was dedicated to more systematic recovery, with using the technique of hand fanning. So no excavation, just systematic recovery of some key pieces that would help myself and Jean-Christophe continue to understand the site. So just very briefly, for those of you who have an interest in the diving aspect, the diver is using the rebreather, so he's breathing in a mixture of helium and oxygen. It's 8% oxygen and 65% helium, and then the carbon dioxide goes through the scrubber. The scrubber cleans the carbon dioxide, and the computer injects enough O2 to keep the diver alive. That's the theory. And if something goes wrong with the system, the diver bails out and uses the open circuit cylinders to recover from the dive. One of the incredible things that the dive safety officers are doing is that they're developing a protocol for people working at these depths, including safety measures, where we have exactly the same bailout cylinders along the shot line, and they're permanently there. So in 2017, we moved some objects to the side, and then we dedicated one of the diving days to recovery. And this is what a typical day's mission looks like. So you have one safety diver who's on top of everybody. It seems as though the safety diver is far, but because he's filming with a wide angle, he's actually pretty close. He's not as far as he seems. Then we've got another diver who's filming the activities, and 4 divers who are removing objects through hand fanning, and you can see there's hardly any current because the sediment is not moving. And think about sort of how to communicate the site, but there's no way we would have invested all this time and effort into the site. But if we wanted to excavate, we had one problem. We couldn't turn to the manuals that exist out there and say, okay, I'm going to, you know, sort of just implement what's in these manuals to work at on these sites. I mean, there's obviously a lot of useful stuff. We just had to see whether A, it can be replicated at depth, and if not, B, what we could do. And there was no way that we could use sort of standard practices. And by the way, this is a photograph from the 2014 field school at Xlendi Bay, which was also sponsored by the foundation, where we had a number of participants from various parts of the Mediterranean coming to the On a Frost site to learn about underwater archaeology. So there's no way that we could use inch tapes and plumb bobs and offsets and so on. So we needed to develop even a system of recording if we were to excavate. This is what happens when you get given an iPad Pro and a pen, and when you spend hours decompressing and you have too much time to think. So this is what I sent the dive safety officers, and I said, look, this is exactly how I envisage the site if we're going to excavate. It's more or less using the same techniques as with regard to a shallow water site, but instead of having a pump on the surface, in our case, the pump it's a submersible pump at 95 meters, and the thing that drives the pump is on the surface. So this is the second diagram that I put together. The A to F are the control points. Okay, so any good excavation needs proper control points, and the yellow area is where I envisage the excavation to happen. Why there? For a number of reasons. This is the area where the blocks meet the ceramic, so we wanted to understand the relationship between the two. It's also an area that's been disturbed, probably by a fisherman who discovered this site some decades ago and then sort of left it. And finally, this is the best preserved part of the shipwreck. So if the next 2 or 3 years is all we ever do on the site, at least future generations will have the best part of the shipwreck left to study. So there's a lot of work that goes on prior, a lot of preparation work. Oh, I better speed up. This is the courtyard of the Archaeology Centre. So you know, Charlie and Seb preparing, that's all the gear that has to go up to Gozo. We were lucky that RPM Nautical for 2 years in a row have given us the use of their vessel for a day, and we go up to the site, and using their crane and their ROV, we're able to lower all the heavy material down to the site. This saves us about 3 days of diving, so it's absolutely fantastic. And so with the control points in place, we have specially printed targets which we put down and remove every year. The other thing we developed in 2007 is this thing, we call it the Johnometer, very creative because the person who thought of it, his name is John. It measures 2 by 2 meters. This is a spirit level. And these are 3 ceramic tiles with adjustable feet so that we can get the thing level. Now, what this does is it not only gives us X and Y, but with this base map and the Johnometer, we can actually measure X, Y, and Z and depth now, which is obviously crucial if you're going to excavate. So this is the 2 by 4 meter, and then it's subdivided into 1 by 1 meter quadrants. The blocks are this way. And we plotted everything. We measured the control points in the 2 by 4 meter trench and put all the data, including the legacy data back from 2007, into a site recorder database. This is the the dredge, the 2018 setup. Okay, that's the submersible pump being prepared for, and all the hydraulic pipes. There's 200 meters of hydraulic pipes, so 100 meters down and 100 meters for the return. And this is the pump that's manned from the surface. It's on the front of that small boat. Typical day setup. Team 1, Kari will do 3D. We eventually will be seeing, we've now moved, it's the 3D recording is a one-man show. Now we've got a light setup where we've eliminated the second light person. And then the first, after the 3D is complete, the other diver will set up the site ready for excavation. And then the second team will excavate and close off the site. This year we had up to 4 teams excavating in the morning. And this is what the excavation looks like. So you can see there's one big light rather than many individual lights. This helps us tremendously. We do kick up a lot of sediment. And this year we changed the dredges from plastic to steel, and they've made a massive difference. They're more powerful, and they've helped us actually excavate much more than we did in 2018. So nothing different to excavating in shallow water. Two differences. One is the short amount of time, but there have been excavations on air at depth whereby divers have spent 15 to 16 minutes at 60 meters diving once a day. The difference between those projects on normal scuba equipment and ours is that those divers can dive up to 5 days in a row. We can dive a maximum of 3, and then we have to have a day off so that we can get rid of, we can de-gas, because getting rid of gas may have has a different connotation. Now, the only difference is when you work with a rebreather is CO2 retention. One of the things that you're not meant to do with a rebreather is work overly hard. So not only do we have a limited amount of time, but there is also a limit on the effort we can make whilst underwater. In year 1, so last year, we collected the spoil in spoil bags. In 2019 we put filters on the dredges so that we make sure we're not missing small objects. And as I alluded to earlier, we've now got it down to one man with 3 powerful lights who can do the recording of the shipwreck. And what we did is that after every single day of excavation, we recorded the site. So if there are 3 teams that are excavating, that's 3 times 12 minutes, so that's 36 minutes. Every 36 minutes of excavation, we were getting a very high resolution model of the site. And it's not just to have a pretty 3D photogrammetric model, but one of the things that we're working on, or that we use, is actually comparing the depths, okay, day by day. So this is the first day. I'm just doing comparing two of the days. So the first and the last, and you can actually see the difference in the levels that we've excavated. The scale is on the top left-hand corner. It's not the absolute depth. It's the depth from where we started, which is more or less the gray, down to these levels. So for example, where there's red, we've excavated approximately 30 centimeters into the seabed. And that is the last day. So this year we only recovered 2 ceramic objects. The strategy this year was to excavate. so that next year we finish removing the sediments, and then we're able to, the strategy is to dedicate 2 or 3 days, diving days, to recovery of the objects from the trench. So some of the highlights, these are photographs very few people have seen. This is a Phoenician fineware bowl, which came out. So I'm showing you results that are coming out from, so these are a result of the excavation. So if we didn't excavate, we wouldn't have known that there's a Phoenician fineware bowl. These are quite rare. They're spread from the Eastern Mediterranean all throughout the Phoenician world, and it's an absolutely beautiful sample of this typology. Something else that came out absolutely fascinating is a graffito on one of the amphorae. The jury's still out as to what it represents. Could be an animal, a boat, possibly the facade. One of the team suggested that the potter had a very naughty son, and when the pots were still wet, the kids scratched something on it. But this is one of the objects that we're going to be recovering next year. And the site, as it was left, quite clearly we don't leave it like that, because we're coming across quite a lot of fragments of wood. You can actually, these are all fragments of wood which ended up there when the ship started to break apart. So we cover it with 2 layers of geotextile. Okay, so it's a small wreck, so 12 by 5, maybe 1 meter, 60 cubic meters of archaeology. But since we started work in earnest in 2017, there's a lot happening. So post-excavation in 2018, we obviously sieved the spoil bags. Importantly, we kept the sand from the spoil bags, so we filled the sandbags to keep down the geotextile with sand from the actual site, so as not to risk introducing sort of anything alien to the site. We're researching the size of the ship. There's a lot of interest with regard to shipbuilding from this period. We can say that she was approximately 16 meters in length, which is similar to the sites in Ashkelon of Israel. And there are about 120 ceramic objects on the surface. My calculation is that there's about 250 in total in the central part. There's a lot of computing that goes on. I did mention the models that are done on a daily level, and then in the post-project phase, we do all the cloud compare, so the comparison of the levels. And then everything is uploaded on the project website. And again, any of you can explore by year, by object. You can measure each object, you can measure the site, turn it around in 3D. It's a fantastic job done by Pierre. So this is one of the achievements of actually coming out with what looks like bathymetric data, what looks like depth, okay, but only from photogrammetry. And one of the things we want to do, nothing beats. Now, sort of, I'm quite into all this photogrammetry and stuff, but nothing quite beats a proper archaeological sketch. And we had it traced by a professional archaeological illustrator, and Pierre was trying to develop a program. So we're saying, look, this is the site in 3D, and this is what we want. And then, the computer would come out with something not quite what we wanted. So far, this is what we're achieving through our photogrammetry. It's not quite the sketch, but it still gives you a much better, less distracting visual of the site than a 3D photogrammetric model. So that's one of the things we're working on in the background. The archaeology, one of the most common typologies is Ramon 2.1.1.1. This is a quite a common central Phoenician amphora from the central Mediterranean. This typology was made in Malta and Gozo, Sicily and Tunisia, and it's found as far north as Tuscany, Petecuse, which was today is called Ischia, this island where the Phoenicians, Greeks and the Etruscans sort of lived side by side for the sake of profit. A second typology is this Zit-A from, it's a Petecusan type. We know that they were copied in Sardinia. And again, various places throughout the central Mediterranean. And then two types of, these are the main typologies, two types of urns. And the interesting thing is that most of the urns from the Phoenician period we know from funerary contexts. And for the first time we're actually seeing them as part of a cargo. Again, from as far north as Rome in 700 BC, and Petecuse is always sort of this central player. And one thing that brings all the stuff together, so we have a jug, so that's quite similar to this. This is as yet an unknown typology. You can see the pinches on the neck, so look out for the Gambin one. I've always been desperate to have a jar named after me, and this may just be my year. Anyway, so coincidentally, there is a tomb in Malta, in Imtarfa, which has all the material that we found on this shipwreck, including a Greek drinking cup, which is dated quite securely to 700 to 675 BC. Right, so what tests and what other research is emanating from this cargo? Together with the University of Tübingen, we're looking at organic residue analysis. So they've come over twice, they've sampled, and everything I mentioned is open to our students, to volunteers from overseas, to, we're welcome to as many volunteers as practical, obviously. And one of two indications have come out, so they've traced pine tar and beeswax, and the latest results are also showing a strong indication for wine. Ancient DNA with Elizabeth Briggs, who's here tonight, and the idea is to see whether we can or cannot, which is just as important, extract ancient DNA, if not from the amphorae themselves. We've collected samples of the sediment from inside the amphorae and also from the sediments around the shipwreck. So that's work that's starting in 2021 and should yield some great, 2020, sorry, and should yield some great results. Pollen studies, this is quite cool actually, because we not only looking for pollen which could come from the cargo or from the dunnage, but we've actually done an experiment. So when we called to explore the ancient harbors of Malta, our French partners always discarded the first 2 meters. They say, it's kind of been furrowed and disturbed, so it's not worth looking at. So what we did is we actually cored the Gambin one. I'm happy with that. The large amphora, and we've taken segments, and so now, and we actually sent seashells from the core for C14 dating, and we have minus 500 BP, minus 1000 and minus 1500. So all the record that's missing from our cores is actually present in a fantastic sequence from this amphora. So you can imagine the ship sunk 2,700 years ago, the contents emptied, and slowly but surely, Xlendi, being a river valley, is pushing out these sediments, and the lighter sediments, including pollen and so on, settle inside what is essentially a long-term pollen trap. So that's the second aspect of pollen that we're looking at. And the third aspect is, this year we also excavated a chunk of bitumen. Okay, we know that bitumen originates in this in its natural form in the Middle East, and now we're about to send a sample to France to have it processed, and then the slides will be sent back, and hopefully through the pollen studies we'll be able to identify where it was from. For those of you who know my wife, please mention that I did mention the pollen, because that's her. She's the paleontologist on the pollen. That guarantees domestic bliss. And then the blocks I didn't mention are actually grinding stones. They're saddle querns, and they're brand new because we can tell they haven't been used. They're not eroded, and they're complete with the quern and the rubbing stones. We have them all. And we took some samples, both from the quern and from the rubbing stones, sent them to a laboratory. We're working with the University of Urbino on this, and we know exactly which corner of Pantelleria they were cut from. And now we've just published a paper because an archaeologist excavating in Cadiz, in Atlantic Spain, in the archaic levels of the settlement, actually discovered half a grinding stone from exactly the same corner of Pantelleria. Now, in no way am I saying that our ship would pick up the grinding stones and go all the way to Cadiz, but quite clearly now we're starting to see this pattern of movement, of goods from one side of the Mediterranean, the bitumen, all the way to the other. Now, hopefully, our shipwreck can shed light on sort of what the role of the central Mediterranean network was in this broader movement of goods. And thin sections. So one of the most important things is starting to identify the clay. So some of the objects are from Malta and Gozo, and this is very important to us. It gives us more of a kind of ownership on the site with regard to our present society, because this is not a ship like Paul's ship that came sort of by mistake and was forced here by a storm. This was a ship that had called on the island and was leaving after having traded. And then, very importantly, is that one of the main types of amphorae that's present on board, which we thought was Petekusen, is actually being made locally in Gozo. So whether it's forgery of wine and then sort of they're bottling it in Petekusen style amphorae and selling plonked in some corner of the world, or whether now we can establish that it was not only these typologies were not only being copied in Sardinia but also in Malta. Okay, so there's all this information, all this methodologies that we're developing, and layers of information over information. And the last challenge is actually how to communicate such a unique site. So, as part of the project, we set up a small but lovely exhibition together with Heritage Malta. Two rooms, but quite a lot of information with some of the objects on display. Every single year that we're at Xlendi Bay, we have an outreach event. So one of the evenings is dedicated to outreach. John Wood last year gave a talk about the first project in Xlendi, followed by me talking about the 2018. So sort of from the first to the latest. They're always very well attended. This year we decided to do something different. We set up 3 stands, one with VR, one with actual objects that were a piece of wood, and a small urn that we recovered this year, and then a table explaining how we process the photogrammetry. And again, this is a relatively popular seaside town, and people were quite interested. We do this with the local council and the Ministry for Gozo. VR, so we have the models which we use for the archaeology, and VR plays a big part. But not just passive VR. One of the things that we would love to do with the site, and one of the things we're planning to do, is to use all this information to create a a history lesson or a series of history lessons for kids anywhere in the world. So the idea would be, instead of the history teacher walking in and saying, okay, kids, turn to page 17, and all the kids, in the history lesson sort of roll their eyes. We want to make history fun, and it will be an exploration led lesson. So the kids put on the VR sets, they're free to explore. We're developing a system where they have a virtual net around them measuring 2 by 2, and if they see something that's outside of the cage, they can teleport themselves with a control. And the idea is that they'll be able to pick up an amphora, see where it was from, what its contents were. So we're studying geography, history, etc. The idea is there. I have to find somebody clever to put it in place. This is the last model from 2018, which we use for our VR work. We sent one of the models to Britain and had it printed by people who work with the Ashmolean, and we also had some miniature amphoras, and we used this as we experimented with this for what I thought was a fantastic event, because everything I've shown you is either for somebody who has access to VR or access to visual, something like a screen. But I thought of, what about the visually impaired? So we set up a kind of line whereby we gave them a talk, and after giving them the talk, we allowed them to handle the amphora. Then we scaled it down. We said, okay, this is the amphora now 11 times smaller. So this is what the amphorae feel like. And then we allowed them to explore the site. I get carried away, and I got the museum to get me another amphora, and you can see I'm surrounded by a lot of concerned museum officials, but I think that smirk on his face makes it all worthwhile. So that was another way that we communicated the site, and according to the Association for the Visually Impaired, they thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, so that's my more than 50 minutes. Now, I'm privileged to be here to, communicate this extraordinary site and project. But I'm just one part of a very, very large team. Some people come and go over the years. There are people who have been there, since day one. And quite clearly, without these guys and girls, all this would be impossible, and obviously without the support of the foundation and the other sponsors. So on behalf of everybody who has an input in this project, thank you very much. Okay.
That was excellent. Thank you. That was just brilliant, Timmy. It was really, really interesting. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, such a breadth of material that you're recovering, both in terms of focusing on the local region, but also the extent of the trade, clearly, and the challenges. I mean, I think you're incredibly brave. I wouldn't be carrying on to 100.
Oh, stupid.
Oh, stupid. Yeah, that's true, actually. I've got a couple of questions, but let's just see. I'm sure there are others. Mark.
Yes.
Thank you, Timmy. Wonderful presentation. I have 100 questions for you. Can I ask two, Mark?
Well, it depends on how many other hands go up.
Can I just ask you very briefly mentioned that fishermen maybe decades ago finding the site or having an impact on the site, but you didn't mention how you've come to learn this or find this out. My other question was actually quite a practical one, or my interest eyes, but maybe no one else. I worked for 3 seasons at Mazatos with Dr. Stella. It's only 45 meters, not 110, but that's always done at the end of the day, so that it can be processed quickly, or at least a rough process quickly can be done in the evening, and then used to brief. So look, evaluate what you've achieved in the day, and then use it for briefing the next day. But I noticed in your schedule, your 3D photogrammetry times in the morning, And I'm wondering if that's just due to visibility.
Okay, that's a very good point. And the reason that we do it in the morning is that we need to be absolutely sure that all the sediment has settled. Otherwise, if you descend to 6 minutes, you're at 110 meters and you can't record, you've missed it. There's no second chance. What we did do this year is we deploy a small ROV. We dive the ROV, we film the site for 25 minutes, and we base our briefing on the 25 minutes of footage.
Fishermen?
Okay, so the fishermen, I spoke to a local fisherman. He told me that his father fished in the area, and the core business of a fisherman is catching fish, not getting his nets caught in amphorae and bringing pieces of ceramics up. So what I think happened is that the guy fished it for rockfish and eventually got fed up of getting his nets caught and then stopped fishing.
But you haven't identified who he is to cross-examine him. I think that's what Mark's saying.
Yep.
Very talkative. I'm interested about the UNESCO manual and how applicable it is in your work. You mentioned of the technical aspect of it and the limitations for the diving aspect, but what about the actual techniques that are mentioned in the manual and the ethics?
Look, some techniques are standard, the hand fanning, the dredge. What was different was what pump are you going to use? It's not a standard. I remember at least the first edition of the NAS guide even had sort of how to make your pump, how to construct your pump. I can picture it now, but you can't just translate that and do that. You'd need a pump half the size of this room. Then the other way of sort of taking offsets, I can also picture the NAS manual with the cannon and the offsets, how to make, which is ideal, and this is what we still use today in shallow water. But in 12 minutes, you just don't have the time. So we literally had to. That was those are the two main differences. Otherwise, the concept and the approach is the same. We would not have done it if it was any other way. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us how many dives actually performed on the wreck? Because I was interested from a technical perspective, how many instances of DCI have you noticed
Okay.
in all those dives?
Good point. So I can't tell you. Look, so in 21 days, I would dive about 15 times 12 minutes. I don't know how many minutes that is, but the equivalent of, my colleague who's excavating in a prehistoric cave in Malta does it in 1 day. And I am envious. So I don't want to brush, because the numbers aren't coming back to me, but we do put the numbers on the annual report, and the annual report is available on the Honor Frost website. So there are not only the numbers of minutes that we spend, but also the liters of helium that we use, etc. And also the number of dives that the backup divers do, because they're diving down to 30 meters, sometimes 3 times in a day. So DCI, we've had one suspected case in 4 seasons of diving. It is one, we all want to go home after the project. Nobody's sort of this crazy. So it's layers of, and every year if we can introduce something that's going to make the project safer, we'll introduce it. Yeah, David first, and then we'll come to the front.
Thank you. Terrific presentation.
you and your team have to be congratulated for doing such an impressive job on a low-cost basis. But as it's December and Christmas is coming, and a Santa Claus came in and said, Timmy, you have as much money as you want to continue this project, and I'd be interested to hear what you would do differently with an unlimited budget, and then would it really change the results?
I stopped believing in Santa Claus when I was about 8 years old. But I can't say that I've never fantasized about that. You know, we do spend a lot of time on that blooming trapeze, so thinking does go into overdrive. Well, I think that I would contemplate excavating with saturation divers and just having my team descend to do the photogrammetry and the recovery. But only the excavation would be done by saturation divers. But that alone, and that would take about 60 days to excavate the entire site. Then I would invest a big chunk of money in a conservation center for the Maltese Islands for once and for all, because we don't have the facilities to do conservation of metals and wood. We do the ceramics ourselves. And then, as Fred Hocker says, every country needs its vasa. And I would put all of this stuff, including the hull, in a museum. But maybe my children's children. Yes.
You said this ship had not sunk through a storm, but was sailing away from the island. How do you know?
No, I maybe I wasn't clear. It wasn't brought by accident by a storm, like the ship that Apostle Paul was sailing on. When you observe the weather patterns in the area, even with a stiff northwesterly breeze, so not a gale, it creates a counterswell. So the waves come in, they bounce off the cliffs and come back out, and where they meet and then collapse. So the two waves collapse under their own weight, and it literally sucks the vessel down. And the danger of this area is clear because a few 1.5 kilometers to the southeast, there is this 3rd century BC shipwreck, and there's also a 1st century AD shipwreck, which John discovered and worked on in 1958. So there is clearly a pattern of ships sinking in the area, and I'm convinced it's related to this strange wave pattern. Yes, there are two questions here. No, don't.
Just a quick one. You said there was a very small exhibition. Is it coming back to Malta and Gozo this coming year? Is it still on shows?
Yeah, it's going to be open for the duration of the project. So we're 2 years into a 4-year project, and it's going to remain the agreement with Heritage Malta is to keep it open for the duration of the 4 years. And then there's a new museum for Gozo opening, and they're going to dedicate a site partly to the objects that were brought up by John and subsequent projects in Xlendi, and partly to the Phoenician shipwreck. It's visited by about an average of 2,800 people a month. They're not huge numbers, but it's in Gozo, in the Citadel. Yes, sir.
I'm fascinated by the training requirements. Can you give us some idea of what the size each of these?
Okay, yes. So it's fascinating because these are everyday objects. They're essentially what we're looking at is the movement of kitchen utensils. You know, it's the equivalent of today everybody has a mixer in their kitchen. So they're about that size, they're beautifully worked, the edges, that high, and they weigh about 30 kilos. So one of the questions I get is sort of, they must have got the stowing wrong by putting stones so high, but they weigh no more rather than an amphora full of oil or wine.
So they're not ballast?
No, we did, for the first time. Obviously, I'd like to be invited back, so I'm keeping back what we're seeing, you know. No, but on one side of the shipwreck, we think we found the extremity, and we're definitely seeing a pattern of ballast. We've recovered 2 samples of the stone, and we're going to send it for petrographic analysis to see where it's from.
Can I ask?
Yes, of course.
The timber, because it looks quite fragmentary. You did mention the type of what it is, but maybe you could repeat it. Because Lucy and I had a work meeting this morning, and she was forcing information out of me. So, but we sent a fragment from last year, which we recovered last year, to a laboratory in France. It's been identified as pine, probably Aleppo pine. We also sent it for C14 dating, and it dates to 700 to 650 BC. So it's spot on with our reckoning with regard to the archaeology. This year we recovered a lot more fragments. One of them actually has a perfectly round hole with drill marks. I had the opportunity to see it with Fred Hocker, and he identified the drill marks, and then we recovered a larger piece, and this actually has axe or adze marks. He tells me that you can't distinguish. One of the pieces seems to be darker, so we're sampling that and sending that away to Frederic Guibal next week for ID. I'm convinced that there has to be a substantial part of the hull that's well preserved and underneath all these layers. I'll ask more questions later. Right, one more question if we have.
I've got a question.
Okay, sorry.
It's just about the psychology of 12 minutes. You know, but what does that, when someone says to you, I'll see you in 12 minutes to me or something, I mean, how is it when you're down there, you've got 12 minutes?
It's more like I'll see you in 3 hours, because the dive is 3 hours, but 16. So we obviously have somebody on the surface who's keeping time and says, okay, now the second team is bound to come up. Next year we're going to have a second ROV, because the ROV, the battery doesn't last for the entire dive. So what we do is we put the ROV down in the beginning to make sure that the pipes are set, and we can give a sign to switch the pump on, and then we put it down in the end so that we're able to watch the video and plan in the evening. Next year we're getting a second ROV so that when the battery runs out, we can pick it up and put it down. But to answer your question, Crispin, there's literally no time to think. We know exactly what has to be done. As the 6 minutes that we're going down, we're repeating in our heads, okay, I've got to label this, that, and the other. I've got to move the dredge to here. Because if you waste 3 minutes, it's 25% of your time done. For every 1 minute you spend extra on the seabed, it's 15 minutes extra decompression. So if your time goes from 12 to 16 minutes, that's 1 hour extra decompression. If you spend more time, then it goes up exponentially. We don't allow it because the bailouts that we have are for a maximum of 16 minutes on the seabed. So we calculate that every diver should be able to come out of the dive on his or her own. Yes, of course. So 12 minutes. There aren't comms. There are no comms for rebreathers. The simple answer is that yes, it would be beneficial, but there are at the moment no known comms. You can't dive with a full face mask. No.
one last
My.
question. It's all your mates asking you questions.
I know. And for sure it's going to be an awkward one.
When are you going to stop diving?
Okay, so to excavate the entire site at this rate will take us 18 years. So obviously it's not going to happen. I'm not going to. So the idea is that we'll go on for another 2-3 years to finish this this trench. But there's a lot more to do. As long as I'm fit and I'm certified as fit to dive and dive to these depths, then every single diver every year, no matter how close or how well I know him or her, has to submit an up-to-date medical certificate. Okay, and that for us is crucial. So I don't know. Maybe 5 more years.
Well, thank you very, very much, Tim.
Thank you. Of course.
I'd just like to add one last cheeky thing on behalf of the Foundation. First of all, to thank you very much, but also to advertise the publication of our first volume in the Honour Frost publications series, in the general series. This is in the Footsteps of Honour, which was one of the sessions in the Honour Frost conference that we held in Cyprus, with the University of Cyprus in 2017. And this session was put together, obviously, to honour the lady, but also to explore the contribution she made and others subsequently in her footsteps have made to the development of the discipline. And we're very happy to present, or to show you our new first publication. I'd like to thank Miranda in particular, the editor, for all the hard work she put into this. And we're working on the publication of the second volume, which is also a product of that conference, encouraging PhD students who are scholars to publish, not looking at one in particular, and a few of the others in the room who are close to that stage. But if you've got research projects, but this is the idea, is to encourage publication of obviously research-based material. But the good thing about the publisher we're using, Sidestone, is that it is freely available online immediately on publication to anybody to download, which was our primary objective, because we want to make sure that research is accessible. So anyway, thank you for letting me come.